Welcome to the Transform Sales Podcast, where forward-thinking business leaders come to share their experiences and ideas, learn from each other, and amplify their results together.
Hey guys, Amir Reiter here with another episode of the Transform Sales Podcast. My guest, Chris Rack with Demand Science. Chris, what's up? How are you?
Good. How are you, Amir?
I'm good. I love the name Demand Science because I'm all about demand and I like the scientific approach. So you got me interested already with the name. Excited to talk to you today. For those that are the first time listeners, we often have people on listening to this podcast who are either sales agency owners themselves or first time buyers of outsourced sales, sometimes repeat buyers. And the idea here is for us to talk freely about the mistakes that buyers make during the process with the hopes that if they hear us talk about the mistakes, they might not do those same mistakes again. But before I get into that, we'd love for you to introduce yourself, tell everybody who you are, and especially how you got into the lovely business of outsourced sales to begin with.
God, so I'm Chris Rack. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer. I've been in, we'll call it the demand generation space for about 17 years now, right? So, I've worked in all stages of the funnel across my tenure. So I've worked with some companies at the very top of the funnel, where we focus a lot of our time here at Demand Science on intent and syndication. I've worked in some spaces at the very bottom of the funnel and appointment setting and SDR type services as well too. So I've really worked with sales and marketing professionals from top to bottom, across many different companies and many different facets. So I've seen a lot of interesting wins. I've seen a lot of interesting misses and a lot of in between over those years.
We're going to talk about the misses, but before we do that, how much revenue have you guys helped over the years?
Demand science specifically, or like, so, I mean,
demand science. I know it's a big number. People like big numbers.
Yeah. So we are collectively at Demand Science in my tenure here, we're in the hundreds of millions.
Yeah. Which is awesome. And great. Where are you based too, by the way? You're stateside. You're in Chicago, you mentioned?
Correct. I sit in Chicago, where we have a sales office in the far western suburbs of Chicago. It's just easier to say Chicago, but it's really closer to Iowa than Chicago. The Demand Science North American headquarters sits in right outside of Boston as well. So we have offices in London, Sydney, Singapore, Boston, Chicago, and continuing to grow.
Awesome. I think you guys acquired one of my friend's companies. I think you guys did. It was Reply.ai. No. Airborne. That was
yes,
you guys.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. It's awesome. Small world. So you've seen it. You've been around and you've seen it all 17 years. So I think this is going to be an awesome answer for me to hear, for me to ask, and for people to hear. Mistakes that buyers make. And now I'm not talking about the mistakes they make that affect your ability to convert them as a customer. Really focusing in on the mistakes they make that, one, hurts them during the selection process and leads into poor performance. Has there been something that's just been repeating over and over again that you've said, hey, buyer, if you don't make this mistake, I can help you better? What has that been?
Really, it always comes down to setting and having realistic expectations of what deliverables are, right? Too often, especially in the demand generation and sales outsourcing space, folks are looking to maximize resources and lower cost, but they have this perception that an outsourced company is some sort of magic in a bottle, right? Generating meetings, opportunities, pipeline is the hardest thing for any B2B company to do. Any company. Right. If you have top 10 things that challenge every sales leader, generating pipeline, meetings, and opportunities is always going to be number one. So thinking that another company who doesn't know your product, services, industry as well, et cetera, is magically just going to fix all of your challenges, right, is probably a perception that you shouldn't have. And if there's a vendor out there who's telling you they can, you should probably run away fairly fast.
And they do. And that's the part of this podcast, is so that people can hear the biggest and the best companies saying the truth. And not get into the hands of the people who say, your unrealistic goals are realistic for us, because they never are. And it always ends up in the same thing. I tried outsourcing before and it doesn't work. So it's the same end result. So this makes a lot of sense. And we've heard this before, right? So there's a commonality. Unrealistic expectations, right? So anybody listening, Chris Rack has been the Chief Revenue Officer of Demand Science for some time now, and it's been the same thing over and over again. If you are shopping with unrealistic expectations, you will most likely be unhappy with any company you hire, right? And it's interesting what you said, right? Like driving demand is one of the hardest things, and it should be, right? And that's why, historically speaking, people in sales typically earn more money, right, compared to like customer support, right? So I think a lot of companies that hire internally, they typically have higher salaries for their account executives or sales reps, right? So they know it's harder, but then when they go to purchase, all of that changes, right? And now it's low cost, lower results, faster results. Why do you think that really happens? Is it a lack of education about the thing, or is it more or the fact that they have a problem when they come to an outsourced sales company and now they're under the gun? Like what's the real symptom here?
I mean, it's just your consistent look for lightning in a bottle, right? Like everybody just has hope, right? Everybody has hope that like someone can help me solve this thing that is really hard to solve, right? And one of the biggest challenges is that, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the stats in the press out there that most revenue leaders, especially in B2B, get about an 18-month lifespan, right? You get hired, there's big goals, and most get about 18 months to either crush them or move on, right? So usually the outsourcing conversation either starts really where at the beginning, and that's when that happens. Usually you have a CRO or a sales leader who's really well versed in the market, right? Knows what to expect and sets up the foundation of their team, right? As outsourcing is a component of it from a cost optimization structure. Usually what happens though is not that. And you have somebody who's been doing it 12, 13 months. They're struggling. They haven't been able to solve for it. They can't figure it out. And now they're throwing, proverbial, I'll use, American football references. I don't know how international your audience is, but they're throwing proverbial Hail Marys, right? Maybe this thing can fix me. Maybe this company, maybe this expert, maybe this LinkedIn guru who talks about how many meetings they set for my competitor can solve my worries, right? And most of the time, they're looking for a lightning in a bottle, and it just never correlates that way, right? Sales development, even whether you're doing it internally or with a partner, is a process. It's a learning process. It takes time, right? That's why most commitments with sales development professionals should be 12 months, because you haven't figured it out for the first 6 of those 12 months as you're currently working with messaging and audience reach and all of that, right? It's not as simple as anybody with an outreach instance, some data, and a couple of sellers does not make a sales development outsourcing company. They think it does these days, but it doesn't.
Interesting. I tend to agree with all the things you said, because I've seen similar things happen. About that 12-month mark, it's something that I would bring up, where in my early, CloudTask used to be a service company before it was a marketplace, and we used to do month-by-month deals and thought we were great, and we had the most amount of unhappy customers. And when we started doing 12-month contracts with a 4-month out, right, we had it out, like all of a sudden we kept like 90% of our customers, and they renewed. So there's definitely a balance, I think, between commitment and time, right? And it's kind of one of those hard things where it's very hard to tell a buyer, like, this 12-month contract's for your own benefit, because you're probably going to want a cash flow ROI on a 9-month sales cycle in 3 months and lose all your money, which happens. So it's like a tough thing being like, this is for you. But I am actually a strong believer, after seeing probably 700 programs and hearing about them, where I think there's that sweet spot with a 12-month commitment, maybe an out of certain metrics, but it's a big difference when people think it's a short-term Band-Aid, right? And they're getting some results, they're typically unhappy. And I think they forget to realize that even with an agency like Demand Science, right? Like the first 90 days is pretty much building a program, basically, right? And depending on the program. So that's it. I think a lot of people listening to this, if you really want to grow your sales, I think you got to start asking about the worst case scenarios, not the best case scenarios, right? I think it's like everyone tries to buy on the best case scenario, right? But it's like a budget, right? If you're planning on making $1,000 and then you make 500, you might be not able to pay your bills. But if you plan for $500 and you make 1,000, you're in a better situation, right? And I think that Chris, you probably share that same sentiment, that setting right expectations doesn't mean that people are going to work less hard, right? I think there's like this thing where it's like, if I don't ask for 20 meetings per month, the guys are not going to work 40 hours a week, right? I think we need to learn how to separate that and say, hey, be delighted by the results, not setting up crazy expectations where right off the bat, even if you have a lot of the times the people, they have a great ROI, but if your expectations are off, they're going to be unhappy, and I'm sure you've seen that.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen customers that had like a 500% ROI, but because their expectation was 2000%, now they're unhappy with you?
Oh yeah, and that's on the seller who sold the solution, right? And I tell that to my sellers all the time, right? Like, I mean, it's really just a matter of like having a realistic. I mean, one of my first mentors told me that the deals that are the ones that really make or break your business are the ones that you walk away from, right? And most sellers, especially in performance-based media, right, whether it be top of funnel, mid funnel, or services, don't have the discipline to walk away from what is a bad deal, right? Everybody has the client who says, give me the 1 month test. If you show return, I'll buy so much more from you. They never do, right? Because the
Never.
expectations they have on that 1 month, right? So like being willing to walk away from a deal and say, hey, I believe in what we do. It's a 12-month process. And at the end of the 12 months, you're delighted like all of these other hundreds of customers that I have, right? And if that doesn't work for you, I can recommend a couple other vendors who have shorter terms that may or may not work, right? But again, there's nothing more powerful in the sales process than telling a customer that we're not a good fit for you, right? Because that's truly believing in what you do and doing it well versus trying to accommodate crazy expectations of customers. And it's not easy to do. Most sellers mess it up terribly.
Yeah, most leaders mess it up. Almost everybody lessons. I think it's like that Warren Buffett thing. When you finally learn how to say no, is when you finally start to make money, and it's just hard. It's hard. It's hard to process. It's the same thing. That concept of failure is success, right? Like it's very hard for people to process like failure is success, right? But it is every time over and over again, right? And it's the same thing as saying no. That's a whole different ballpark to walk into, like how account executives should be compensated, like more into the onboarding. And I do think that there's something fundamental with the way we sell that leads to that. But it also starts, I think, with buyers understanding that, the buyers can almost sometimes negotiate themselves out of the service they want, right? And I noticed that very often, if you work with some of these companies, they have very strict rules and they stick to it for a reason. We say we have these rules for your benefit, right? And then when you do the same thing to them, it's a whole different thing. So, and it's interesting because even software as a service, SaaS, right, is outsourcing. It's don't build your own software, pay for us. But then you have software companies that go, we don't outsource, and it's like, well, if you're fundamentally telling your buyers not to build their own software and outsource their software development to you by renting it, and you don't buy that way, there's a little bit of a disconnect, right? And I think ultimately it affects the buyer's ability to sell, and it affects sellers' abilities to delight customers, right? Over and over again. So that makes a lot of sense. I tend to agree with the things you said. I've seen it as well. I think that unrealistic expectations are always like the kiss of death for probably a lot of things in life, right? Talk to me about mistakes buyers make now that they are working with you, right? Like they pick the right vendor, they're working with a company like Demand Science or Demand Science. Has there been something that just comes up over and over again? Now it's like, okay, we got over the hurdle of how you buy. Now you're a customer. Now don't make these mistakes so that we can get you the results. What does those look like?
I think like customers sometimes overcomplicate things. They're just adding layers of complexion into setups and flows and things of that nature, right? Which multiple instances of CRM and software and text and connectors and APIs, right? And variables and fields, and it gets just too into the weeds. Where in its simplest form, just getting, leads and opportunities in the right spot, right? And moving them most efficiently through your funnels is the best way to go, right? I mean, if I were to give advice to any customer working with any vendor in the demand generation space, it's again, make sure you're working at all levels of the funnel, right? Because the bottom of the funnel in the actual setting of the appointment, whether you use an internal SDR team or an external SDR team, if you're reaching out to a group of folks who are somehow got into your email nurture flow and you've been educating them with content and you've been educating them on the problems of the space and the solutions and the different variables, when your SDR or the outsource SDR calls and says, hey, I'm from Demand Science, like it resonates and it clicks that this company actually knows what it's talking about, and now they're more open to that meeting, that call, etc. So most of the time it's over reliance on one tactic is where I'll have a customer come to me and be like, we're doing appointment setting already. And I'm like, well, what about the top of the funnel? What about the middle? What about other services, at different stages of the buying process? You can't eliminate one of them just because you're focused on a different tactic, right? That's usually a pretty common mistake folks
Do
make.
you think that's a symptom of lack of education or lack of tools or lack of process or just a combination of all? Like what's the
No, it's a combination of all. It's really running full funnel, sales and marketing working together, right? To work on both the top, middle, and bottom of the funnel is really complicated, and most teams don't do it well, right? So that's obviously a challenge, and it has been a challenge since the dawn of time in marketing and sales existed. The amount of expertise, and obviously it's not easy to create content that's engaging in a world that there's content everywhere, right? Everywhere you look, there's good, bad, or indifferent content being generated. So consistently having a team that's generating content that's resonating with your ICP and resonating with your customers and really, really gaining value. It's not an easy thing to do. There's not an unlimited supply of people who are creating good content these days. There's a limited supply of people creating content, but the amount of it that's actually valuable and good is significantly decreasing. And you can just jump onto LinkedIn and find that out fairly quickly.
100%. It's explosion of it. It's interesting. I'm almost, for me, and this is somebody who, ran big SDR teams and I've been in this for quite some time. I feel like the word demand gen is not really properly understood. And I feel like buyers don't really see their websites as being a store, right? And they're oftentimes, this word inbound and outbound for me is confusing because I'm like, well, if you have SDRs that are following up with people that filled out forms, that's inbound. Now they're at MQL. Now you're calling them. Is that outbound? I'm like, for me, it's just all revenue and demand gen, right? And I feel like that separation is what kills a lot of revenue teams versus everybody's just on the revenue team and everybody's just following, understanding who our TAM is and where they're on the stage. And I think that a lot of that, in my opinion, maybe you can correct me if you're wrong, like I think a lot of it to do with this big growth spurt we had, right? And I think now we're entering probably in a phase of more predictable growth, more profitable growth, and less, let's just hire 100 SDRs, hire a bunch of outsourced sales companies. Let's not plan it, right? I almost feel like we were in a symptom of just really good times where everybody was just doing what everyone else was doing without measuring it. What do you think about that?
And there's a whole generation over the past 5 years of sellers who aren't actually very good at sales, who think they are because they happen to be in a market that almost any human could sell in, right? I sold in 2008. I sold in the times up and down before then, and I've seen a lot of it and selling, in generating meetings and with money was cheap for the past 4 years, and the amount of funding going into all different types of spaces, the amount of companies operating on significant cash burns, really fueling growth at all costs, really funneled directly into the sales and marketing services and software business substantially, right? So, it was, there's 3,300 marketing technology companies right
I think there's more.
Yeah, there's 77,000. Everybody's seen that infographic, right? So there's just so much out there, and it's become so diluted that everybody kind of, I guess you would say, I agree with you. They've lost the vision, right? Identify your ICP, engage them, right, and then build a level of trust with them that you know what you're talking about, and they will come to you to solve your problems. Whether you make that connection at the end via an inbound request to your website or an outbound call from an SDR, both can happen, but you can't just magically hire a bunch of people, make a lot of calls, and it turns into revenue for you.
Well, you can. You lose your money.
You could. It's just an expensive way to go about it.
Yeah. You might as well donate it to the Demand Science Fund.
Yeah. You can donate that to that fund anytime you'd like. I'm happy to take money to the Demand Science Fund. My girls are in competitive cheerleading. It's really expensive, and they like all that stuff. So that's why I work, 80 hours a week to make sure that cheerleading happens. I'm not
gonna go down that rabbit hole. If you move to Colombia, it'll be a lot cheaper. Everything seems to be cheaper here. I live in Medellin, Colombia, where even a full-time trainer, top notch, is $100 for a month. So versus $100 a day. So we could fix that.
Competitive cheerleading would probably still be expensive there too, I would bet.
1/5 the price.
Yeah.
everything's 1/5 device when you convert the money over to pesos, that's a separate call. I'll get you to come down here for
Got it. Okay, I'll check it out.
For our event. Talk to me about like your best buyer if you had to only pick. And I know that you guys work with both services, and I know you work with software. But if you had to pick and you could only pick one, which would it be and why?
You know, we work generally best in the technology and software space, right? Just because their growth models are built to align with our product suite the closest, right? And technology is it's better aligned with that I have a problem, help me solve it and educate me on it, right? Most technology companies have they're a lot more content heavy, which is the foundation of demand sciences, demand solutions, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
We take customers' content and turn it into opportunities, leads, and revenue. So services companies a lot of times don't have a lot of great content to put out there because it's not easy to sometimes it's not easy to take a service and put it into a nice consumable piece of content as it is a piece of software, which could be a demo or a slide share or something of that nature. So altogether, I mean, we have clients across multiple industries who work with us, and really the ones who are most successful, the ones who are partners in success, right? Where we get on calls and we're happy and willing to tell them that they may be doing something that they should change or try a different alternative, and they're open to those alternatives, and they're happy to tell us that we should make some tweaks on our side, and we're happy to do that. And we find a middle ground that creates long-term success. I mean, of our top 20 customers, 95% of them have been with us for 3 and 4 years plus.
And a lot of them are big, right? So a lot of notable brands.
They are fairly large, yes.
Yeah. Some of the enterprise big companies, I know we can mention them here, but you guys work with some of the biggest and the best companies that are consistently hitting forecasts. A lot of them are publicly traded, I know, and you guys are part of that forecast secretly, which is awesome. Tell me about region. Are you guys better suited for EMEA, United States, right? Like if someone's listening in, they got a software, they got a product, they got content, they want to get some top of the funnel activity. Do you guys have a particular region that you prefer?
We're a global company, so I have teams in U.S., EMEA, and APAC. We're both on Australia and in the upper APAC region as well. My North American teams handles any Latin American stuff as well too. And I have a couple of my European folks who speak Spanish and Portuguese. On occasion, I'll have a customer who only speaks in Portuguese, and I have a couple of folks there who kind of sub in for email writing and things of that nature. That being said, you got things like ChatGTP and things of that nature that can help us do instant translations and stuff on that side, which have been quite helpful recently in engaging with our customers who aren't in languages we aren't fluent with. But I think we have customers in 27 different countries now, so it continues to grow.
Awesome. So one last question before I let you go. I'm gonna talk about ChatGTP because you guys are very content heavy. How do you see ChatGTP and products like that changing the landscape for sales agencies like Demand Science in 2023 and beyond?
It's fascinating. I mean, I think that a year doesn't go by when someone says that sellers aren't going to get replaced by AI or something of that nature. And I think I just posted on LinkedIn, or I have a post coming up on LinkedIn that I have scheduled, because yes, people do schedule their LinkedIn posts. But ChatGPT and AI technology isn't going to replace sellers and sales services, right? But it is going to make those who embrace it really, really good at it, right? Like that. Like there's never a time that like buying and selling is too much of a human process, right? There's too much emotion in it. I don't care if you're a B2B buyer. I don't care if you're a B2C buyer, right? Buying a piece of software carries the same emotion to it as buying a box of cereal as you're walking out of the grocery store because it looks delicious and it's perfectly placed, right? There's always going to be emotion in there. And as long as there is that emotion, like trust is something that a computer can try to regenerate, but it'll never be able to recreate, right? Because it's something that happens organically. And sometimes it's something that's beyond our control. Some people have generally trusting tones of voice, generally trusting vibes, and at the end of the day, buying and selling, especially large, in some cases, very large software purchases, it comes down to, do I trust that this person's going to make me look good in the long run? And there's no bot that's going to be able to ever accomplish that. But is it going to make me more efficient? Right? Like, again, This week with ChatGPT, I wrote a job description that HR has been bothering me about for an account executive. So instead of writing it myself, I typed into ChatGPT job description for lead generation account executive, and it wrote it for me, and it was quite amazing. I asked it to rank different cities that, rank things to do in London, because I'm going to London next week to see my team and I wanted to check some things out. And it gave me a stack ranked of things to do in London based on people's, so like the amount of ways that humans can use this technology to become more efficient, more productive, and really do great things is really astounding. Um, is it going to increase the amount of LinkedIn messages I get from bots that say things that I'm going to ignore? Yes, it will do that, right? Is it going to increase the amount of emails that you and a lot of your buyers get that are written by bots that are fairly terrible and pointless? Yes, it's going to do that as well too, right? But those of us who understand the foundations of selling and how to use that technology just the right amount by still putting a be human approach to it are the ones that are going to exceed. Those who rely on it to replace and cut efficiencies altogether will end up struggling, because most buyers can tell a bot when a bot is engaging with them about a mile away, no matter how good the AI is. And most people get turned off by it.
So just to recap that, from what I'm hearing, and I think I agree with most of the points, ChatGPT is going to it's going to allow better sellers to get better, right? Better writers to get better. It's not going to replace any jobs because human touch is still needed. I agree with you. And it's an opportunity for people to take their game up to the next level. I agree with all that, right? I think the one thing we didn't mention is that the people that put less effort in before will now actually probably be worse, right? And one of the things that you added about the world having so much content, I now think that ChatGPT will help good content stand out, right? Because with the explosion of bad content, then good content actually stands out pretty well. So I think anyone listening, I tend to agree with Chris. This is actually a once in a life opportunity for you guys to take your skills and your game to the next level, right? And I think we'll actually probably have a lot of smaller companies that do 8 figures, right? You're gonna have a lot of 2-man shows doing 10 figures, which would be great. But I tend to agree with all your stuff, which makes sense. Your leader has been around for 17 years. You've seen the changing dynamic of the world. Before I let you go, because we're going a little bit late, talk to me about Morgan Freeman on your wall and what's that called? What is that movie? Why did I forget? It's
which one? The Shawshank?
The Shawshank.
Yeah.
Tell me about that wall. You got a lot of good pictures, and you got a lot of.
That's my wall. I've had this wall of movies at 7 different offices over the year. I've moved offices, worked from a home. I worked from a home office for 9 years before it was cool to be remote. And COVID happened and all that. So this wall's always been with me. I like movies. I'm a big movie guy. So they're actually vinyl stickers that I've custom printed. And the formation of them always changes a little bit depending on the wall. I've had walls with windows. I've had walls without windows. So every time I move offices, I peel them down and I re-put them up, and it's kind of like my painstaking.
I knew there was a story behind that wall.
Yeah, I'm a child, right? I have.
We're all children.
If you look at my office, it's movies, and I collect Legos.
Why should you not be a child? Getting older just means that we're getting worse at copying ourselves.
We're all children. My office is I had one of my sales leader's sons was in the office the other day, and he just spent like 25 minutes playing with all my toys and all that stuff. But
I'm a big child too, just transparently. I'm a believer of keeping it real. Well, thank you for being on the show. I appreciate you being a guest and sharing some insights. We're definitely going to have you back on. I hope to see you in Medellin for the Sales Agency Growth Summit. I'm not sure if you're even aware of that, but I'm going to invite you to it. And then for anybody who wants to connect with you, to learn more, to be inspired, to ask questions, to have you help them with demand gen, how can they reach you? What's the best channel for them to find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the place I'm most active from a social standpoint, right? You can just search Chris Rack and Demand Science, and you can reach out to me directly. Our website, demandscience.com, will eventually get to me or somebody on my team, take care from that side as well. So anything, again, we specialize in, top of funnel intent data type services to help, both sellers and marketers really focus on what I call making the haystack smaller, right? So times are tough, right? You're going to have less resources, less budgets to do more with, and you have to cover your big TAM. We help you really, really hyper focus on the accounts that have the highest propensity to buy, and then activate them into leads and obviously opportunities for your team. So happy to connect with anybody on the call or anybody looking for some help in that space.
Chris, appreciate you. You're the man. I'm going to continue to pick your brain. Everybody, thank you for tuning in to the Transform Sales podcast. Have a good day, Chris.
Awesome. Thanks, Amir. Take care, buddy.